So we're back for another Folklore and Fairy Tale Friday. Every Friday I go over a different cultural folklore or fairy tale, talk about some historical context, as well as relate some of these stories and the meanings behind them. So I've been doing this every Friday for the month of October, trying to gauge your guys' interest on these type of stories and what you guys think about this content. And yeah, so this is the fourth week we are doing this. And this week I'm going to be doing it on a Japanese mythical creature. So this week's Folklore and Fairy Tale Friday is on a Japanese mythical creature called the Namahage. Now, the Namahage is actually like a demonic type of ogre. They're pretty creepy looking, and they're almost meant to be like a teaching mechanism for Japanese parents to their children. I need to wipe off this lipstick because it's driving me nuts because I feel like I'm going to smile and get lipstick on my teeth, so oh yeah. Much better. The Namahage have been this idea that has been terrorizing children for thousands of years. It's been documented over centuries, and essentially the idea is they punish or they steal young children from their family if they've been misbehaving, if they're crybabies, or maybe if they're lazy. Just if a parent declares their child has been a bad child, it's kind of the Namahage's role in culture to take care of that disobedient child. The idea of Namahage actually originates from an area in Japan called Oga, and to describe what Namahage look like, they've been again equated to demonic creatures but also ogre-like creatures. They often don a mask which can be red or blue. Now if the mask is red, it's considered Jiji Namahage, which means old man ogre, and if the mask is red, it means Baba Namahage, which means old woman ogre. So actually the Namahage can be women or men, but most of the time, which I'll talk about later on in the video, when it's recreated for festivals or ceremonies, it's oftentimes the men in the village that act as the Namahage. The masks themselves are actually really beautiful and ornate, and oftentimes they can be made out of wood or sometimes bamboo, and these are oftentimes created by artisans in the village who essentially make these cultural artifacts for their village to honor the idea of the Namahage. Now I'm going to go ahead and link a website down below which gives a nice little story about one of these artisans. I think it's just really beautiful to hear how a lot of areas around the world still withhold a lot of their cultural symbols to heart and take a lot of pride in recreating these stories to pass down from generation to generation. Now on top of the mask that they also wear a straw coat called a kide and shin guards, which are called habaki, and boots that are called waragatsu. So they have like a traditional dress that oftentimes you'll see them wearing, and it's pretty universal for Namahage. Visually, their faces can vary from like depictions of them throughout history, but for the most part, they're often wearing the same thing. Now, when it comes to what they're carrying around, they often are carrying around. Is this going to be distracting if I'm using this like buzzing thing while I'm like trying to talk? I didn't think this through quite a bit. Okay, let me just run this over my skin really quick. I don't know why that didn't process in my head. Namahage also carry around deva bocha, which are like kitchen knives that are used to cut meat or fish. And they also carry around a wooden pail called a toke. By the way, if I have Japanese viewers who are watching this and are cringing at how I'm pronouncing all of these Japanese terms, I apologize. These are all new words to me. I'm doing the best I can. Now, the term Namahage actually originates from the word Namamohage, which is in Akita dialect translates to peeling the bulbs of the feet or like peeling the blisters off the feet. It's actually really interesting, the metaphor to this, because essentially, as many Asian countries are and were back during ancient Japan, these countries experienced very harsh winters. So a lot of times when winter would roll around, a lot of the warmth provided for a family home would naturally be from like a fireplace or some type of stone pit. So it was considered a sign of laziness if you had a lot of blisters on the palms of your hands or maybe the bottom of your feet, because it meant you were spending a lot of times with your feet up and your hands up, hanging out in front of the fire. So having blisters on any area like that would insinuate that you were like a lazy person, which goes back to the translation for Namahage, which to peel the blisters off the feet or to peel the bulbs off the feet essentially means to like rid the laziness from you. And in stories, this was oftentimes done with the debabocho that the Namahage were said to carry. So it was used to cut meat, and then it's also used to cut the meat off your feet. Is I guess how I'm thinking about it in my head. I never thought in a YouTube video I'd be talking about cutting meat off feet. Or Penis Island, if you guys watched last week's. So I'm opening up new territory for myself with this series. And Namahage have been documented since the Edo period of Japan, which lasted from 1603 to 1868. The oldest record of Namahage is actually in the book Oga no Samakuze, and this was written by a writer called Suge Masumi, who lived in the Akita area for over 25 years. And he was known as a very prolific author and writer during his lifetime. He also would document a lot about nature and the day-to-day lives of people in villages. Namahage can also be seen documented in another folklore book called Koshugatsu no Homosha, which translates to Visitors of the Lunar New Year. And this was written by a man named Kunio Yanagita. Kunio Yanagita was actually more of a modern-day author since he lived from 1875 to 1962, and he's considered like the father of Japanese native folklore. Now, despite being documented in different historical texts throughout history, there's actually no real known idea of exactly the first record of Namahage in history. It's thought that, like I said, they have been thought to exist for thousands of years, and there have been a couple different theories throughout history as to the origin of Namahage. Now, the first origin story of a Namahage, the theory number one, comes from the story of the 999 steps. This legend actually starts in the Han Dynasty of China with Emperor Wu, who came to Oga over 2,000 years ago, accompanied by 5 bats. Now, the purpose of his voyage to Oga with these 5 bats were to find medicinal plants that were said to have properties that could be made into an elixir of immortality. The 5 bats that were with him worked diligently with the emperor, and they eventually came to him and asked him for a day off. Now, they were basically saying, we work very hard for you, so can you give us the 15th of the new year off, and we would appreciate the rest day. Oh yeah, and by the way, these bats had turned into Namahage at some point in this story, whether it was when they were looking for the medicinal plants or after they requested the day off, but for some reason these bats metamorphosized into Namahage, and on their rest day or their day off, these 5 Namahage decided to descend into the village. So you'll see kind of later on, Namahage are said to come from the mountains. So in this story, they did descend from that area, and into the village they went, and essentially they were looking to steal food from the village, and specifically they're women naturally. So the villagers are upset by this, and they're trying to figure out a way to rid their village of the Namahage that were terrorizing them, and they came up with this idea to propose to the Namahage if they could build a huge 1,000 stone staircase overnight, that the Namahage could take all the women from their village. However, if they failed to complete their task of building the stone staircase overnight, the Namahage had to leave. Now, of course, hearing this deal, the Namahage agreed, and they started building this stone staircase overnight. Now, as they started approaching the 999th step, the villagers came up with the idea to simulate the sound of a rooster crowing. Now, obviously, during this time, villagers used a lot of cues from nature to indicate times of day or the time of year, so upon hearing the roosters crowing, the Namahage immediately assumed it must be morning. So thinking that they had failed their task, the Namahage left the villagers to their peaceful ways. So that's actually one theory of the origin of the Namahage, and that's pretty much the most common folklore or folktale that I could find on the Namahage themselves. Now, like I said, there are multiple theories to the origin of the idea of Namahage. The second origin story or theory for Namahage comes in the form of, I guess, mistaken identity. Foreigners most likely came to the region of Oga or different areas in Japan, and of course to the native Japanese, these foreigners looked very odd to them, were most likely a different skin tone, different hair color, spoke a very odd or foreign language to them. So it's thought that this idea kind of meshes with Namahage, that maybe foreigners possibly came from mountains or from overseas and came into Japanese lands, and to make sense of it, Japanese people recorded this as Namahage. I mean, face it, if you think logically, if you lived during these times and you saw a completely different race of people you've never ever experienced in your life, nor in your wildest dreams had ever imagined or pictured them, it would be very bizarre to experience that and try to make reason or logical sense of that happening. Now, the third theory is kind of what I was insinuating earlier on in the video, that the Namahage are very closely associated with mountains or mountain gods. It's even said that the Namahage serve as servants for the mountain god himself, or themselves, I guess. And this kind of goes into play with this ceremony that's held every year in Japan, in, of course, Oga, or I know they hold them in different areas of Japan. And they essentially hold like a Namahage festival to celebrate and almost invite them into the village, and also to soothe these spirits or creatures. Because again, despite maybe being thought of as negatively, Namahage also provide a benefit to villages in the sense of offering protection or good luck, bringing good fortune, but also preventing disease or protecting lands in general. So Namahage can also be seen as a good force in that sense. It's actually really funny to watch online. You can look and find videos of the ceremony taking place in modern day, and essentially men from the village will go up to a shrine and consume a lot of sake or possibly mochi. The most common shrine that this is done at is the Shinzan shrine, and they basically prepare themselves to go from the shrine or the mountains into the village and go through the ceremony of asking the children, have you been bad this year? Have you been naughty? Are there any crybabies here? Are there any lazy children here? And the parents actually can say whether or not their children had been good that year. And it's almost like a scare tactic into influencing children to obey their parents. Because obviously in Japan, like a lot of Asian cultures, children listening to your parents is a very huge cultural pillar in their society and how they think. So in these videos, like I said, you can see on YouTube, there's like a lot of, it's kind of funny, but also really sad and heart-wrenching watching these like babies and children cry and their parents just handing them over to the Namahage, who essentially just ask them a couple questions and scare them a little bit and then hand them back to their parents. But the idea is, if you've truly been a bad child, the Namahage will take you back with them into the mountainside. So another part of the ceremony is like a soothing part of the ceremony, or offering. So parents will offer up goods or foods, meals, sake, mochi, those types of things to the Namahage to satiate them. And that's what invites in the good luck or fortune for the year. And also, again, comes with that added benefit of hopefully leading to very obedient children. Now, besides targeting children, Namahage also target newlyweds who must atone for their sins in the first year of marriage. So it is kind of the same thing as far as offering food and drink to soothe the Namahage for newlyweds as well. One thing that is a big no-no with this ceremony and Namahage is if there has been a death in a household or a birth in a household, the Namahage are supposed to avoid that household specifically. So that is pretty much it for the Namahage. The Namahage do represent, at least from my understanding, a fairly big part in Japanese culture. In fact, in 1978, they were declared intangible folk cultural property. So they could be seen as a mascot on lots of different foods or treats, or you can go to even a Namahage museum and you can see them represented in movies and all over the place. So it's kind of one of those things you've probably seen before if you've ever looked at Japanese culture, but maybe you just never knew what you were looking at. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Folklore and Fairy Tale Friday. I had a lot of fun exploring a different culture. And one of you guys actually left this as a request in one of the comments in one of my last videos. So I do read the comment section of these videos. It's very, very helpful for me to gauge if you guys are interested in this type of content, because I'm still toying around with if I'm gonna keep doing this or not, because it does take a lot of time and effort on my part, and I just want to make sure I'm creating content you guys like. And it's also helpful for me to see maybe ways I could improve, or some, again, requests from you guys, because I'm obviously not just going to be sticking to Korea or Japan or Asia. I'm going to be hopefully branching out into different cultures and countries. As always, I hope you guys are happy and healthy, and don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, share with your friends and family, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys!